This is Leonard Kish with HealthIT TV. I'm here with Dr. Adrian Gropper, the CTO of Patient Privacy Rights.
Yep.
And really the go-to guy on patient privacy and enabling patient access to their health information. Along those lines, Secretary Burwell gave a keynote last night where she talked about the pledge. So tell us about the pledge and what it really means for health IT and patient access.
To me, what the pledge means is that the industry is going to go all out to avoid congressional action. Right. There are 3 or 4 kinds of bills coming down in the post-high-tech era. There's some related to substance abuse issues, there's some to research issues, there's some to data blocking issues, and any one of these could update the patient's right of access for the paperless era, where the last time we had anything in HIPAA change was elimination of the patient's right of consent in 2002, because it was considered too hard and too risky. And so now we're 14 years later, we have these massive movements of data that are completely out of control of the patient, and more than that, they're unaccountable to anybody. So we have massive breaches that only show up 6 months later when the data is being sold by the millions on the open market, because nobody knows they're happening when they're happening.
So what are the elements of the pledge that are going to change that?
Well, the pledge isn't going to change anything, because if the industry had wanted to do something about this, they would have done it. And as many people have pointed out, there are no teeth.
Yeah.
There is no penalty behind the pledge. You know, there are many opportunities before this, like for instance, direct and direct trust, which has failed miserably by almost any measure. And it is interesting, in answer to a question today, one of the ONC people basically said, you might as well use email, because that you can make work under the law. Direct trust is a horse that isn't going to hunt. So we have all the evidence in the world that without either congressional action or much stronger interpretation by the regulators, which isn't going to happen, because last Thursday, as part of the PMI annual event, the regulators said, we are not going to do this. You know, HIPAA doesn't cause us to act in this way against data blocking.
Right. So, you know, there were a lot of hints last year on the Senate Help Committee, indicating that they're tired of hearing excuses about interoperability, about patient access. The pledge is a way you're saying then they're hoping that deflect that.
Yes.
Okay. So what's really going to happen now?
Well,
do you think congressional action is going to actually have some teeth? Is it going to change anything?
Well, I can't predict what Congress does. I don't know if anybody, and I'm certainly not in that business. I think there's one other opportunity which I'm counting on, which is that the federal health architecture, including Medicare with Blue Button on Fire specifically, providing access to Medicare claims using the modern APIs. There's the VA and the work we started here with ONC and patient privacy rights a year ago called Privacy on Fire. So there are parts of the federal health architecture, like I say, VA, DOD, FHA, SAMHSA with the substance abuse regulations, that because they don't have the business barriers or the lack of incentives, could take a leadership position here and basically say, look, we have clear guidance that HIPAA allows us to behave in this way. Meaningful use allows us to do this. The word is may. You may accept a digital signature. You may expose FHIR to a patient-directed, in a patient-directed way. You may not put any delay in between so that the data becomes useless for second opinions or for price comparison. So there's all these mays. Now, if the federal health architecture in pilot projects like Privacy on Fire doesn't take the may and say, yes we may,
really
here it is, because they don't have a business reason, then there's really something rotten at the very top. And again, you have to fall back to congressional action. But either way, you have to fall back on congressional action. But I'm saying there's 2 ways that patient privacy rights is pushing on the policy side. And on the technical side, there's a lot we're doing too. But
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that, about HIE of One, Health Information Exchange of One. How do you really create, all of this is kind of dependent, and I've seen quite a few different takes on exactly how to do that in the past year to make data really patient-centric as opposed to siloed and, institutions and EHRs. So what are you working on along those lines?
It's actually relatively simple. It's the power to delegate access to delegate for technology's sake. So in other words, we all understand how we have the power to delegate to a lawyer to act on our behalf, or to an accountant to file our taxes by acting on our behalf. Mm-hmm. These are things from the paper era. But when it comes to health information, now we're in the digital interface era, APIs. And what HIE of One is basically taking these emerging standards like FHIR and HEART, which stands for Health Relationship Trust, and saying there is no inherent limit to the technology that one person can own. Can I own my defibrillator? Mm-hmm. Can I own my personal health record? If I can own those two things, then can I own the digital agent that authorizes a third-party access? Mm-hmm. So we all know that we could do that with paper, right? You can go and hire a company and pay them $100, and they will send out paper requests by fax to everybody and say, give me the records of Joe and we'll take care of it. Can I now do that for free by having a digital agent that can sign digitally these pieces of paper and reduce that cost that might be $100 now to zero, so that in effect what I'm doing is acting as a health information exchange of one. And so HIE of One is a pilot reference implement, is a pilot demonstration, a proof of concept, if you would, of using the most modern of these standards out of MIT and work that MITRE did, and an EHR to sort of show that this can now be done if there is a right of access.
So there's a few things there. There seems like there's a hurdle around digital signatures, to your earlier point, around the May.
There really isn't.
No?
No, in other words...
It seems like physicians just aren't used to the idea. But
this is not about physicians. This is purely about architecting a system. So let me put it this way. Take Google, for example. Google has a lot of private information. Google takes that private information that they have about me and they expose it to absolutely anybody I want on a massive scale of hundreds of millions of people using OAuth, which is the same thing that FHIR uses, without any data blocking whatsoever. What they do is they have a developer console. When you're signed in, however you're signed in, because it doesn't matter, you go to that developer console, you copy 3 pieces of information back and forth, which admittedly is a little bit fussy, but you can also do that dynamically. It's just that they haven't implemented dynamic OAuth. And that now establishes a consent for any app, anywhere, it could be in China, to access my data in Google. And there is no app store gatekeeper. Google doesn't say they're in China, I don't want to deal with them, or they're written in this language. And so what I'm saying is there is provably, and Google actually testified to this point in the API task force about a month ago, where patient privacy rights also testified, that you can do this at a massive scale. Everybody knows it because Google's been doing it for a year. And so there's no security, there's no scalability.
Is the same model apply for in the case of agents then with Google, or that seems like maybe another hurdle? You have agents acting and being able to sign on your behalf around health information.
It's only a matter of degree. In other words, the issue of once you understand that the breach only affects that one person, whether they're in Google or in CMS. Just like a bad direct address only affects that one person. It doesn't. Now all of the security barriers are gone. And whether you're talking about agency or whether you're talking about directly specifying the third party, which is what you just asked about, that is no longer a security issue. That becomes a issue of how do you want to practice. So Google has an incentive, Facebook has an incentive not to make it easy to have agency, because that's part of their business reason. But CMS, the VA, they don't have any reason to not allow agency. So in other words, if you look at it technically and from a security point of view, it's the same thing. If you look at it from a business point of view, it's very different, the answer to your question.
Right.
We can go into details, but that's the peak's answer, if you would.
Anything else coming out of HIMSS that you want to talk about or has been interesting? What do you look that might come out of it around interoperability?
Well, there is one thing that should come out of it. We had a meeting yesterday for 3 hours between the HEART, the Health Relationship Trust people, the Argonaut people, HEART being sort of represented by Justin Richard, who wrote MITRE ID Connect, which is the UMA reference implementation that we use and other people use. Justin representing, obviously, the API Task Force input and the Argonaut input. And then Graham Grieve representing FHIR. And I can't say that we have a list of action items that popped out of it, but it's very gratifying to see these three groups that sort of represent all of the business and regulatory issues. In other words, the Open ID Foundation, which is sort of the broader identity and security community, like I was mentioning Google, you know, there, and obviously FHIR and HL7, and then sort of the ONC and federal input through Josh, to see us all trying to solve this problem and sort of shine a light forward. So I would stay tuned and hope that that keeps going the way it was.
And hopefully we'll have more than 8 months or so to keep it going that direction.
I don't know what happens in 8 months.
An election.
It shouldn't. This really isn't a partisan issue. It really shouldn't matter who wins.
Yeah.
I really have no.
You think it'll go the same way no matter?
It will. You know, looking at what happened in the last 8 years or since high tech, it could have gotten better. Let me put it that way.
All right. Well, thanks, Dr. Adrian Gropper. This is Leonard Kish with HealthIT TV at HIMSS 16. Thanks.